Center for Politics.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Jim Ryan, and I'm the president of the University of Virginia. I'd like to thank all of you for joining us for the first of what we're calling Democracy Dialogues, with tonight's conversation being led by our own Larry Sabato. We've always known this event would be timely, but we didn't expect it to be quite so relevant. At this point, I'm sure you've seen what's been happening at the Capitol in Washington, and I'm guessing that many of you are feeling the same mixture of anger, disbelief, and sadness that I am. Walking out of Independence Hall after the Constitutional Convention in 1787, someone is rumored to have shouted to Ben Franklin, "Doctor, what have we got, a republic or a monarchy?" To which Franklin replied, "A republic, if you can keep it." Our form of government has never been guaranteed. It only works if we choose to protect and sustain it, to exercise our basic rights, to respect the rights of others, to denounce violence, and to honor one of the hallmarks of any democracy, which is the peaceful transfer of power. The violence in Washington today was an attack on our democracy and a painful reminder of just how fragile our system of government can be. I can honestly say I never expected to see anything like it in the United States of America. But if there's one silver lining to this otherwise sad day, I hope that it's more people realize that being a citizen of this country is an active thing, something we do, not just something we are. And part of being an active citizen means thinking carefully about the values we share and working together to make this country a little more perfect, which begins by actually speaking with one another, which brings me to tonight's event. We've designed these democracy dialogues as a series of public conversations addressing topics and challenges facing our democracy in the United States and democracies around the world. The format of these events will vary from debates and panels to roundtable discussions and fireside chats, but all of them will feature experts representing at least two different perspectives on key issues facing our democracy. This is important for at least a couple of reasons. First, I think we all recognize the need to turn down the temperature and try to find some common ground in a country that is still deeply divided, as evidenced by what happened in Washington today. And second, I've always believed that our success as a university depends in no small part on our ability to prepare our students to be comfortable confronting and debating differing views. These dialogues are designed to model that debate and conversation, and hopefully demonstrate that despite what we might see on cable television or social media, that we can still try to understand and learn from people whose perspectives are very different from our own. That includes truly national leaders from across the ideological spectrum who work right here at UVA. The team at the Institute of Democracy is already working on lining up topics and speakers for upcoming events. Eventually, the plan is to hold these dialogues in the Dome Room and broadcast them nationally. But for now, we're all on Zoom, which actually has some advantage because it means that more people could join us who might not have been otherwise able to make it to Charlottesville. Tonight's event is led, as I mentioned, by the one and only Larry Sabato. Larry is a director of the Center for Politics, a New York Times bestselling author, one of the nation's most well-respected political analysts, and a member of the faculty here at UVA for more than 40 years. The center's crystal ball election forecasting for the 2020 presidential election was just named the best in the nation by the Harvard Political Review. I can't think of a better person to help us try to make sense of what's happening in politics today, and I'm incredibly grateful to Larry for leading this. I also want to thank tonight's guests for joining us after a very long day. Finally, I'd like to thank Cindy Frederick and everyone else who helped organize this event, and a special thanks to Jim Murray, the rector of the University of Virginia, for personally providing the initial funding through his philanthropy to help get the democracy dialogues off the ground. Jim and the board have been incredibly supportive of this idea from the very beginning, and I'm grateful to them for making tonight and future conversations possible. With that, I will turn it over to Larry and join all of you in the audience. Thanks again to all of you for being here, and I hope you enjoy the event.
Thank you so much, President Ryan. We appreciate your introduction. By the way, it often feels like I've been here 40 decades, so I'm with you on that. But it's really important that you've established the democracy dialogues. To me, this tumultuous, chaotic, disastrous day in U.S. history has underlined the importance of speaking to one another, trying to dialogue with one another and come to some terms. Even if you can't completely compromise, you can certainly have a good conversation with people you don't agree with. And we're going to talk about that in a few minutes. To all of you out there, I welcome you to this. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. A special welcome to all the university students who are enrolled in this year's unusual January term. And of course, during a pandemic, everything is unusual, but this is particularly unusual. We're going to try to make the best of it over the next couple of hours. I think you'll understand and appreciate and maybe give us a small pass on the fact that parts of the program have been in meltdown because of what's going on in Washington. And certain individuals we had hoped to have on the show, we're not going to be able to have, at least immediately, though we're going to try and correct that in the very near future. For example, our first guest was supposed to be Senator Tim Kaine from Virginia. Well, he happened to be in the Capitol during the invasion. I don't know how else to put it. This was a kind of coup d'etat. And by the way, the president said he's going to make sure that all the subsequent events will not be scheduled during coup d'etat days. So we'll be asking all the various groups who are involved in this to please give us a calendar of their coups. In any event, Senator Kaine, like many members of Congress, and let's remember he was Hillary Clinton's running mate in 2016, was ushered into a secure room which doesn't permit telephone calls or Skype videos or anything, and so he very much wanted to be with us, but could not do so for the moment. It's possible that he will call in during this program, and if so, I'll pretend to be Larry King. You remember Larry King? And put him right on the air. If we can't get him tonight, we're going to tape record a videotape, a conversation with him in the next day or two, and we will, of course, put that online and notify all of you who have signed up for this program, and I understand that it's well over 10,000 at this point. So Senator Kaine isn't here. Now remember, I had planned on having a nice contrast between the Democratic nominee for vice president in 2016 and the Republican nominee for vice president in 2012. Former Speaker Paul Ryan. Fortunately, Speaker Ryan was able to do the interview with us, but it was taped this morning. We timed it hoping that we would know the day's big event, which of course was the result of the runoff elections in Georgia. And amazingly, the counting was done much more quickly than the presidential counting was done. So we were thrilled that we had the results of the Georgia runoffs. What we hadn't planned on was that there would be another event even bigger that would overshadow the switching of the U.S. Senate from Republican to Democratic control and the election of the first black senator from Georgia in American history. Who would have believed there could be something even more important? But that is unfolding, and we'll deal with it as best we can. We do have some live speakers coming up who will be able to discuss what's happened. Some of them have been at the Capitol, so we'll get some direct firsthand reports of the events there. Again, we had planned to discuss more about the 2020 elections. I really don't think that's terribly appropriate at the moment. I'm going to show you one map that just to remind you of what has generated the controversy that we're seeing in Washington and around the country in certain swing states. The Electoral College map is already well known to all of you, and Congress is sooner or later going to confirm it because it's reality. And I apologize to all of those listening who think incorrectly that there was significant voter fraud. There was not. There was not. And those who have been saying this, including the incumbent president of the United States, have done the country a tremendous disservice and have encouraged people like the ones we saw crawling across the Capitol grounds today. And tragically, the woman who was shot on the Capitol grounds, I've been told just before coming on the air, has in fact passed away. So it was a substantial victory, in fact, the mirror opposite of the one Donald Trump won in 2016. 306 electoral votes for Joe Biden, 232 for Donald Trump. Trump had won 306 in 2016, Hillary Clinton had won 232. Biden was able to turn some critical swing states either back to Democrats or for the first time in a long time to Democrats, including Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, as well as that one congressional district in Nebraska, Nebraska 2, that is counted separately for electoral college purposes. Now, in the House of Representatives, we had a very close election. The early projections, including from Republican pollsters, were that Democrats were going to gain maybe a dozen seats or 15 seats. Well, instead, they lost almost 12 seats, rather. They're down to 222. Majority is 218, so they have a very narrow margin of control, and it doesn't take many defections or, God forbid, illnesses to change the calculus there in the House. So that's 51% Democratic. Joe Biden won 51% of the vote, and this morning we got from Georgia the switching of 2 Senate seats from the Republicans to the Democrats, and that gives Democrats 51% of the 100 Senate seats. So there's something about that number 51, and it's a 51% trifecta. Democrats have all three pieces of at least the elected branches that one needs to get things done. Now, whether they have sufficient margin for defections is another question entirely. Probably not in many cases. So we at least know the Georgia results. We discussed that and some other things with former House Speaker Paul Ryan, who, like Senator Kaine, understands what it's like to achieve a great pinnacle of power, as he did with the speakership, but lose the vice presidency on a ticket with a presidential candidate. And we should always blame the presidential candidate, not the people running for vice president. At least that's what the vice presidential candidates always tell us. So we had a wonderful interview with Speaker Ryan. He wanted me to stress to you that this interview was conducted before the tremendously disturbing events, the coup d'etat attempt at the Capitol occurred. And so naturally, I didn't ask him about it and he didn't comment about it, but I think you can understand it's difficult to comment about something that hasn't happened yet. So I want to go ahead and roll this tape and thank Speaker Ryan very, very much for being able to do this with the busy schedule that he still has. And I found what he had to say fascinating, and I hope you do too. Welcome back. And now let's get some perspectives on the future of the Republican Party. My next guest was our last pre-pandemic guest right here in the Rotunda's Dome Room, just before the virus shut down in-person gatherings. And it was a great gathering. It's one that people still talk about, maybe because it went well and it was the last one. We hope eventually to have a university again. He's the 55th Speaker of the U.S. House of Representatives, former Speaker Paul Ryan. Mr. Speaker, thank you so much for rejoining us in the Dome Room, and it really was a great day. The students enjoyed it thoroughly, and we appreciated your time. Before I get into anything else, I have to ask you about what happened last night in Georgia. And we don't want to burst into song, everyone's singing the Georgia songs. We just want to talk about how the Democrats captured both seats in a runoff where the Republicans normally are favored. Can you give us your reactions?
Well, I'm really disappointed. I didn't expect us to lose both of these. I thought we would win, frankly, both of them. I was Speaker when we had the last runoff against John Ossoff, actually, and we won fairly handedly. But if you tell your base it's rigged and you incite a civil war in the Republican Party a month out, and we're not talking about jobs, the economy, packing the court, adding states, instead you're talking about a civil war and how the election's rigged, you're going to turn off the suburbanites and you're going to depress your base rural voter. I haven't gleaned through the numbers. You do that, but my sense is that's what the story will coming out of this. And so it's really upsetting to people like me who care greatly about keeping our majorities. And I worry about the policy fallout that's going to come from this.
It will be very substantial for sure. You put your finger on part of this. The Republican turnout was down in a lot of the rural counties that the GOP depends on. What was interesting, though, is the early calculations are that more African Americans, more blacks, voted in this election in Georgia than have ever voted in any election in the 50 states. So there are messages there too, obviously, and we'll sort through all of this as time goes by. But this brings us to what I think is the most important part of our discussion, because you issued a statement that really caught my attention and everybody's attention. I think it was really the #1 story on Sunday. You blasted the move unfolding in Congress this very day, involving somewhere around 140 House members and 13 or more U.S. senators, all of them Republicans, trying in essence to stop the reading of the electoral votes in order to fill in the blank. It depends on who you talk to, what their objective is, but clearly they're trying to delegitimize Joe Biden's presidency, even if they can't overturn the results. And some of them actually think you can overturn the results. If I can quote a small part of this, because it was a beautiful statement and one that will last way beyond this particular incident. Democrat Joe Biden's presidential victory is entirely legitimate, you said. The fact that this effort in Congress will fail does not mean it will not do significant damage to American democracy. It is difficult to conceive of a more anti-democratic and anti-conservative act than a federal intervention to overturn the results of state-certified elections and disenfranchise millions of Americans. As I said, it's a powerful statement. You've kept a fairly low profile. You can't be low profile and appear in Thomas Jefferson's dome room, so it's not completely low. But you've kept basically a low profile. You've been enjoying private life. Why did you decide to issue this statement and do it over the weekend?
Yeah, well, I intentionally kept a low profile because I didn't want to armchair quarterback my successors, Kevin McCarthy, Mitch McConnell. And plus, I'm just been enjoying my family life. But every now and then, in extraordinary times, I think that calls for, making exceptions. And I thought this one rose to that. There are a lot of times where we have votes in Congress where it's a minor policy preference, or, it's just you have to represent your district. But then there are moments of clarity where clear principles are on the line. And this is obviously one of those things. So you had to choose, which do you pledge fealty to a man like Donald Trump, or to sort of the bedrock of our democracy, our Constitution? There's really no question in my mind in this. And I just think it's a moment of clarity. Look, what I worry is fear and ambition were driving this. And, I don't have ambition to be anything, and I'm not afraid of tweet storms. I got over that a long time ago. But so I just felt that I could be helpful to colleagues in Congress who are really wringing their hands over this and worried about this, that just some clarifying statements needed to be made. And it's so clear, the Constitution on this. And as conservatives, we don't want to federalize elections. We believe in the Electoral College. Why on earth we would want to delegitimize these things is beyond me. And the president's doing this for his own personal gain, his own reasons. But that doesn't mean people should follow that. And so that's why I thought a clarifying statement needed to be made. Again, I do this very rarely, but I hope because I do it rarely, it has some consequence. And that's why I just felt in this extraordinary circumstance, a statement like this needed to be made. Because when it comes to conservative principles and really just democratic principles, it's really clear, the vote today in my mind.
And it did have an impact. My former student or University of Virginia graduate, Chip Roy, member down from Texas, has been quoting you. And as you know, he does not support the effort that's taking place today in the House and the Senate on the electoral votes. All right, well, one more Trump question. I want to move on from Trump. I think everybody does. But do you think there will be any problems in the remaining 2 weeks, and any difficulty getting him and his family and staff out of the White House?
No, so I'll take your last one. No, I don't think there'll be any difficulty getting them out of the White House. I think he's down to very few staff right now anyway. I think it's Mark Meadows and Peter Navarro and some junior staffers. So no, I don't believe there's going to be any problem, getting them out of the White House. As far as at the end, I don't worry about big things like, military issues or things like that I've read. So I think the institutions will stand strong. I think, whether it's the DOD or the IC, or the Defense Department or the intelligence community or the Justice Department, I'm not worried about those things because I think there are good people there who will be good caretakers of the institution. With respect to pardons, God only knows what that's going to look like. And with respect to, rhetoric, it will be more of the same, I think, more tweets. But I don't expect material damage being done because I think there is enough institutional strength in our system inside of the executive branch that will prevent such things from happening.
Well, that's encouraging, and I certainly hope you're right. 2 weeks is a long time in certain presidencies, and this would certainly be one of them. Let's move on from Trump, because I understand that you've been working on a post-Trump plan for the Republican Party, which after the Georgia results is even more needed. If anybody had any convincing to do, I think this provides it. Can you tell us a bit about that plan and what it consists of and why you think it will work?
Well, I'm going to be talking a lot more about this at a speech I'm giving at the Reagan Library to honor the 40th anniversary of his inauguration in next month. They're kicking off a series of lectures called The Time for Choosing. And I think as Republicans, we're entering a phase of a time of choosing. And at American Enterprise Institute, where I'm a senior fellow, we spend a lot of time on this, on the future of the conservative movement and the future of conservatism as we understand it. So what we hope to achieve is a conservative movement that is worthy of being majoritarian in this country, that is inclusive, aspirational, and that fundamentally rejects the immorality of identity politics. That is an inclusive vision. Look, I think there's a lot of credit to be given to Donald Trump and to the successes of the last 4 years of building a big, wide political movement that includes the forgotten men and women of America who are blue collar, who are wage earners, who felt that globalization passed them by. But we also exchanged some of those votes for suburban voters, which Georgia is a pretty good example of that. And I think there is a coalition to be gotten here. And the good thing to read out of the 2020 elections, not last night's election, but the November election, is I believe, and this is, everybody takes their wishful thinking out of whatever they see, but my wishful thinking in this is we're still a center-right country. At the very least, it's hard to argue we're not a centrist country. I think we're a center-right country. All you have to do is take a look at the House races and the fact that we picked up seats in the House. So, and we did better in the Senate, notwithstanding Georgia, than I think a lot of people expected. So I do believe that the country does not want to go off the left cliff or far off to the right. So there is a center-right coalition for the making. And the question is, can we build a big majoritarian party that is worthy of being majoritarian, that is principled, that is focused on, principle in the Constitution, inclusive and aspirational? That's what we're focusing on. And I think there are a lot of things that we did in the last few years that did speak to the wage earner. We did produce faster economic growth, higher upper mobility, higher wage growth, and more national security. So I think there's a lot of things that are positive that we can build on. And then we have to fix the problems we have, which is we just pushed away a big section of our vote coalition, namely suburbanites. I think we got to get them back without costing us other parts, and then go and appeal to minorities, to women, to young people with an inclusive agenda that is aspirational and tethered to center-right principles.
Well, it makes a lot of sense. I guess the problem is convincing all these factions, and both parties have factions, to actually move forward. They want their way of the highway.
I was Speaker of the House, you know that all too well. I dealt with factions. Running the House is like running a coalition government, and you deal with those factions. And so I'm very familiar with what that entails. You
mentioned the fact that Republicans picked up House seats, and you're absolutely right. Everybody in the professional business, as the crystal ball is, projected, because both parties, the pollsters and so on, told us that Democrats were going to pick up 10, 15, even more seats in the House. It really was the greatest shock of that election week, finding out that Republicans had picked up 11, 12, 13, depending on how you count the old Congress. And now Nancy Pelosi is left with 222 for the time being, 218's a majority. Do you think she can run the House on that narrow a margin? What problems is she going to have?
Be very difficult. I served in a very tight majority in my early tenure like this. This is going to be very difficult. They will be unified on, rule votes. They cook the rules, so they'll be unified on procedural votes. But it's going to be a centrist Congress. You don't have a choice. The problem solvers, the people in the middle, they are going to have much more say-so than they ever have before. She will not be able to run a very progressive liberal agenda through the House. It's just not going to be possible. And so I think you can get things done. And in moments like this, it's going to be frustrating for people in the majority. It's going to be a really hard thing to run, but she'll have to rely on lots of Republican cooperation. And she'll get that on centrist issues, on issues that aren't ideological but are practical.
Do you have a couple of specific examples where you think Republicans and Democrats really could work together, at least in the House, maybe
Sure.
House and Senate?
Sure. There's the infrastructure issues that you've got to deal with, post-secondary education issues, skills, job training, national security issues you have to work on, appropriations. It's a broken process. Everybody acknowledges that. So fix the appropriations process. I think there are what I would call sort of singles and doubles. That's how I always sort of describe this stuff. You're not going to get a grand slam for your party or your cause, but you'll get incremental gains that people agree on. And there'll be a lot of the Senate. Look, even if clearly we're going to lose the majority, it looks like. I think Purdue hasn't conceded yet when we're taping this, but it looks like that we're not going to win that one either. A 50-50 Senate with a tiebreaker from the vice president I've served in this situation before. You're going to have a cooperative government. And trust me when I say, Mitch McConnell knows how to do this. We will have some cooperation in government, but the challenge, and I frankly think it would have been better for Joe Biden had we kept the majority, because he will be pulled to the left on so many areas, and if they take that temptation, if Joe Biden succumbs to the temptation to go left, then the system will lock down. Everybody will get their dukes up and will become more partisan. If he sticks to the center and puts that olive branch out, which would have been easier if we had divided government, then you'll have a more productive presidency and you'll get things done. I can just go through the list of the to-dos you have to do in a session, whether it's a budget with appropriations and on authorizations that are expiring. That's the first thing to do. Just get the memory, the reflexes of Congress working, all those things that had deadlines, work on those things, forge bipartisan compromises, and then go find some initiatives that people more or less agree on with respect to COVID and the economy and things like infrastructure and education. I think you can stitch together, a productive legislature. But if you go out of the gates, going after, say, like the tax code, which is really, in my opinion, the foundation of a good economy that will come once COVID vaccines are well deployed, then they're just going to lock down and nothing will get done. So I think Joe knows this. The president-elect knows this. But the question is, can he resist the temptation from his left flank to actually have productive government? Nancy can't pass anything that's partisan. She will have to go to the center. It will be hard for her to do that. But I think that it is very possible.
President-elect Biden from his time as vice president, I guess even before that when he was in the Senate. You also served, as you suggested, in the George W. Bush first 2 years when he was in office and had a 50-50 Senate, and I think the Republicans had a majority of 3, even a little bit lower than this. And of course, George Bush didn't win the popular vote, and he had about half of the country supporting him. And yet, well, maybe partly because of 9/11, but even before then, he was able to put together a coalition that worked. He made common cause with Ted Kennedy. Do you really think in this day and time, though, there's any opening for Joe Biden to do that without being repudiated by his own party?
Well, you're going to have to ask Democrats that. I think he himself is capable of it because he knows how to put deals. I've done deals with Joe Biden. He knows how to do deals. He doesn't impugn people's motives. He is, and I mean this in the best way, he is a transactional man in nature, which is he likes to see government work, and he is a person who can get agreements done. I've done agreements with Joe. Whether or not his left flank will go for the ride or not, I can't answer that. But my guess is what Nancy will want to get is a majority of her majority. She'll want to get at least half, and Chuck the same, half of their coalitions with a decent amount of Republicans to govern in the center. And that is Joe Biden's sweet spot. And Joe Biden himself is capable of that. Whether Nancy is capable of that or not, what she will have to do in her mind is forget about another speaker vote. Just get that out of your mind and go govern with Joe. If she changes her mind and focuses that way, then I think she can get things done. But she's always been sort of captivated with winning the next speaker vote, which keeps your progressive, keeps your base intact. If you think like that, I don't think you can operate. The best thing I had going for me, Larry, is first, I didn't seek the speakership. My ascension to the speakership was kind of unique. I was happy over at Ways and Means as chair there. I got drafted into the job, and the members knew I didn't ask for the job and I didn't have to keep the job. It was the best thing I had because they knew if they pushed it too hard, I didn't mind giving up the keys to the speakership. I was glad I did the job. I feel blessed for having done it, and I felt I did a lot of great things with it, but I didn't have to have it, and they knew that. If you, on the other hand, convey the sense that all you care about is keeping the speakership and that next speaker vote, it will make you a much less strong leader. And if she just thinks this is my last time, I don't care about the next speaker vote. I don't care if the progressives are mad at me for cutting centrist deals and getting things done. If she changes her mind from what it has been to what this could be, then yeah, she could have a very productive session. And Joe Biden is the kind of guy who would want to do that.
That is great advice. It makes perfect sense. Even leave aside the ideology on both sides. That's the only thing that makes sense. And she said it's her last term. Well, I hope she takes your advice. We'll send a copy of this tape to her, and I know she'll make time to see it. She should make time to see it. But Mr. Speaker, you've been great to us twice. We had a wonderful in-person visit. This has been terrific, and we really hope to have you and your family down to the University of Virginia at an appropriate time once we can actually see each other in person again. And thank you so much for your time, and good travels and happy private life.
My pleasure. Happy New Year. Go Packers.
Okay, you got that in. All right. Thanks a lot. Appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Cannon House office building, please.
My name's Kyle Matus. I'm the Director of Government Relations at the One Campaign.
I am the connection maker here in Washington. Our organization is a grassroots organization with volunteers across the country who are dedicated, like we are, to ending extreme poverty and preventable disease in Africa. Hey, Representative Roby, good to see you again.
Good to see you too. I'm glad you're here.
Appreciate it.
Hey, Kyle, welcome back.
Hey, thanks. My job is to make sure that members of Congress know what it is that we're working on and that their constituents deeply, deeply care about these issues.
My name is Olivia Beavers. I'm a political reporter for the Hill newspaper in Washington, D.C. Right now is probably the busiest time for political reporters. There's a constant flow of news, and there's the 24-hour news media, so things just move really rapidly. This is the third impeachment hearing in modern times, and after less than 3 years of doing print reporting at the Hill, I'm the one in the room. I always hoped I would get to this point.
Democracy is crucial. My parents, they came to the United States for that reason. Democracy is everything. My name's Somar Metwali. I'm a government major. One of the reasons that I really wanted to come to UVA is because of the Center for Politics. I was just inspired to really jump into what the center does when I saw how they encourage students to really explore politics. Politics is difficult, but I think the center makes it all accessible. I think the center makes it all available, and I think the Center for Politics is there to make sure that we're supported.
I graduated in 2007, a degree in American politics. First started working at the Center for Politics by way of a class with Professor Sabato. The core questions of law, of policy, of politics have always interested me and motivated me. And the Center for Politics took that interest and provided a springboard for me to dive into deep questions and also find a job and an internship, and made me realize some of the opportunities that are out there that could be made available to someone like me from small town Texas. These are opportunities that I didn't know existed before coming to UVA.
What was sort of the big moment during the first open impeachment inquiry yesterday? The Center for Politics certainly opened doors for me. I was actually their first scholarship recipient. It allowed me to get an internship at the White House and pay for it at a time when I wasn't sure if I would be able to accept the position, and it's helped me in my career ever since. It's hard sometimes if you don't fully understand what this world's like to get involved, but the Center for Politics made politics come alive.
My opportunities with the center have actually led me to other opportunities at the university as well. And I think it's because of the skills that I've learned through the center, with development, with programs, how to put on successful events. I mean, these are things that you need in every single field. I'm just so thankful for that.
The Center for Politics changed the trajectory of my life. It made Washington, D.C. much more accessible and helped me understand that there was a place for me to come and serve my country in a way that I didn't know was possible.
A lot of us that are interested in politics, we want to run for office, we want to be Hill staffers, we want to make sure that the cogs of government move in the right direction. And I think the center has really shown that it's all possible. You just have to take your own path there.
Every single day, we don't know what's going to come next. We don't know how this is going to end, when this is going to end.
We will get through this, and we will get back to a time when life is a little bit easier.
There's not one big thing we can all do. It's a lot of little things that are going to add up.
Hope is the one thing that keeps us going when we can't see what's on the other side. We have the opportunity to give the country some hope.
Sure, we have commercials, but they're different than the evening news. None of them involve prescription drugs. So we appreciate your paying attention and listening. I'm going to show another clip that was done this morning with two great analysts, great pundits who are a lot of fun. We had a great discussion. I hope you'll enjoy it. Paul Begala and Tara Setmeyer. I just want to stress again that we had this discussion before the afternoon changed everything. So please keep in mind that they were unaware of what was going to happen. I was unaware of what was going to happen. We would have had a very different discussion if we had known, but we didn't. So let's enjoy Paul Begala and Tara Setmeyer. The makeup of the Senate was decided yesterday with the two runoff elections in Georgia with stunning results. Democrats won both seats. And in the end, once all the ballots are counted, it isn't even going to be that close. Joining me now to discuss the Georgia runoffs and politics in general in this crazy era is first a Democratic strategist, Paul Begala, whose signal accomplishment, there are many, but his signal accomplishment is that he's the father of recent UVA graduate Charlie Begala, who was tied into the Center for Politics, and we miss him. Oh, there you go. He gave you a Virginia thing. Dad. Yeah, I'm delighted that you're a proud UVA dad. But we want him back for a master's, and I told him when we communicated yesterday that you'd agreed to pay for the whole thing. So he's very excited about that. Okay.
Gladly,
Good.
I mean it.
And we also have our current resident scholar with the Center for Politics, Tara Setmeyer. Tara has participated in many of our programs, The students find her scintillating and fascinating. And 2 words they never use for me, Tara. Okay, look, before we do anything else, I got to get both of you to respond to those incredible runoffs and quick counting. The whole thing was really over in the middle of the night. Nobody expected that either. Tell me what you think. Let's start with Paul and then Tara, if that's okay.
Well, it's a revolution. It is a revolution. Georgia is sending the pastor of Ebenezer Baptist Church to the Senate. It looks somewhere between likely and certain that they're also going to send Mr. Ossoff. The revolution there is remarkable. And I go back 30 years in Georgia. I worked for Zell Miller in 1990. He won the governor's race. And then I worked for Bill Clinton, who was the last Democrat before Joe Biden to win Georgia in the presidential. And if I were to pick 2, it's that Democrats mobilize African Americans. It helps to have the pastor of Ebenezer running. It also helps when the Republicans attack him in a way that a lot of folks down there thought was attacking the church. So that really boosted turnout. But the second piece of this, it's hard to cobble together, is suburban whites who have always been Republican. The great Zell Miller lost Gwinnett County, the big suburban county. Zell lost Gwinnett County by 17 points.
Wow.
Bill Clinton lost Gwinnett County by 15 points. Barack Obama lost Gwinnett County by 10 points. Raphael Warnock and John Ossoff just won it by 20.
Amazing.
That's a revolution. When suburban whites are pairing up with African Americans, you form a pretty impressive majority in Georgia.
Well, do you think it's going to continue, Paul? Is this special just because it's a runoff, or is this a long-term trend in Georgia that maybe is going to carry over to some other states in the South?
I think it's a long-term trend, Larry. I think it's 2 things. The changing demography, where you have lots more diversity in Georgia. It's almost sort of the reverse of the Great Migration. All those African Americans who couldn't stand segregation anymore after the Second World War and moved to the North, their grandchildren are moving back. And they're moving back with master's degrees and law degrees. And I mean, it's really impressive how that state has changed. But it's the changing demography, Asian American Pacific Islanders, great large new population in Georgia. But then it's also the work. Stacey Abrams, lots of others have done the work over the last decade to be in the trenches, to talk to people. You can't just show up Sunday before the Tuesday election and say, hey, remember me. And so the long-term effort that Georgia Democrats have made has been really impressive. It's finally paying off.
I think that was made manifest last night with those incredible results. Tara, when you saw that Democrats, well, certainly won 1 seat, and now I think it's pretty clear they've won the other. When you saw that Democrats won both of those Senate seats and took control of the U.S. Senate, what was your reaction?
Well, my initial reaction as a former lifelong Republican who's walked away from the party as of the election because of the behavior of the party and Donald Trump's lunacy and their enabling of it, I had enough. I thought to myself, they're getting what they deserve. That the political gods have finally decided to try to make this right, because our democracy was literally on life support before November. And I feared what a re-election of Donald Trump would look like. And then when we saw that Trump lost, that the Senate control was still up for grabs, I said, okay, we have a Republican Senate as of right now. This means that Joe Biden is going to have a Herculean task. And Mitch McConnell is going to make his life miserable. How is he going to even begin to repair and heal the wounds of this country and the mess that the Trump administration has made in our government when you have the professional obstructionists like Mitch McConnell at the helm? But there was still some hope. And so when I saw that the race was going the way it was going, frankly, I was shocked, because as a Republican who's worked on these races and issues for the last 20 years, to see Georgia go blue not once but twice is it is a political earthquake for the Republican Party. If this is not a wake-up call that the party is on the ropes, I don't know what is. And they deserve to lose. I don't agree with all of the policy prescriptions of Democrats. Obviously, I have a different worldview as a conservative. However, I believe wholeheartedly, and I was rooting for Warnock and Ossoff to win. As a senior advisor to the Lincoln Project, we invested a lot of money and effort in get out the vote work down there in Georgia as well to help flip the Senate, because we believe that in order for a pro-democracy agenda to move forward, that Republicans needed to lose power, because they have demonstrated as a party that they are no longer interested in protecting our constitutional republic or engaging in behavior that protects that. So if that means that Republicans are out of power and Democrats control all three branches of government, well, so be it. This is what we need to right the ship. So I was thrilled. The historic nature of the win is incredible. My very good friend, Nikema Williams, the newly elected congresswoman who replaced John Lewis, she is the chair of the Democratic Party down there in Georgia. And she said a couple months ago, watch us work. And that's exactly what they did. Stacey Abrams and the Get Out the Vote efforts down there in Georgia, they were able to register 70,000 new voters since November for a runoff. You know, those of us who are in politics know that runoffs are usually afterthoughts. You don't see this level of voter participation in a runoff, and not in places like Georgia where they have them, you know, the first week of January. This is extraordinary, and this is really, really good for the health of our democracy. I'm encouraged by the result of this election.
You know, I love politics, and both of you do too, but and I'd like politics every day. We have politics every day, but somehow having an election right after the holidays and New Year's Day is kind of weird, but we all know why it was done. It was done to minimize the minority vote. And isn't it ironic that instead Georgia's first black senator was elected in the runoff? Although maybe that would have happened at any time, it still reminds us that the unintended consequences of any reform will always catch up with you.
Right.
Well,
Reverend Warnock might say, quoting scripture, that the man meant it for evil, but God used it for good.
Oh,
that's right.
That's
Amen.
Good. Yeah. Listen, I know that was really God's, but I have to steal that, Paul. I hope that's okay.
It's from a higher source, Larry, but I'm sure the Lord will let you use it.
Well, we'll footnote it. Okay, we'll footnote it. Look, we have been through in the last, couple decades, but I think particularly in the last 4 or 5 years with the advent of Donald Trump, the most intense partisanship and polarization that any of us have seen. Terry, you're too young. Paul is definitely old enough. But back in the 60s and 70s, we had this kind of intense polarization. I don't even know if it was as bad then as it is now. The fact that Donald Trump is going away, well, maybe he never will, but he certainly won't be in the White House, so I think we can be certain of that. Is that going to help in and of itself? What do we need to do in addition to reduce this polarization and increase the chances that we can all help govern this great country?
Well, I think leadership does matter. And I think the fact that the Democrats turned to Joe Biden is pretty extraordinary. That primary field, think of that stage. That, I think, is the most talented primary field the Democratic Party has ever assembled. Really remarkable talent. And Joe, this is the third time Joe Biden has run. He never before even won a delegate, yet he won 44 contests. He dominated in a way that Barack Obama never did, Bill Clinton never did, no Democrat has in the primary era, dominated the way Joe Biden did. Why? Of course, he's got talents and gifts. The most important talent he has, though, or gift he has, is empathy. The Democrats were not looking for revolution, they were looking for reconciliation. That's why they picked Joe. And that radiates out, right? I think that's why he defeated Mr. Trump as well. So it begins with the leader. And it's really central to Joe's DNA to reach out, to heal. It'll drive some in his base crazy. That's okay. So that's first. But second, we have to be better citizens too. You know, when Shakespeare said, the fault, dear Brutus, lies not in our stars, it lies in ourselves. When that tragic death hit Luke Letlow, the congressman-elect from Louisiana, 41-year-old man, 2 young kids, felled by COVID. There were some on Twitter who were celebrating that, some on the left. That's hate. That is completely wrong. And so we, the people, have to do the same. If we can't see the humanity in a young widow with 2 children under the age of 3, God almighty, what kind of people are we? So I think it has to come from both. We have to reach out. It means that the Democrats now in the driver's seat. It means it's incumbent on them, on us, to reach out, and yes, to reach out to Republicans and to compromise. We've been schooled by Trump to believe that politics is only about your base. And we all talk about the Trump base, and it's impressive. It is. But this is a vast, diverse democracy, and we've got to have inclusion and diversity. Nancy Pelosi has it right. This is her favorite saying. She says, diversity is our strength and unity is our power. So you got to be both. It's hard to be unified when you're diverse, but that's the challenge for America. And I think Biden is a perfect leader for this time.
He does fit the moment very, very well, and he's incredibly lucky. He worked hard, as you mentioned. This is his third presidential bid, but it's still just an amazing series of events and coincidences that put him in the White House. And we've got a 51% government. We all have to keep that in mind. The Democrats have 51% of the House, exactly. They have, in essence, 51 votes, 51% of the Senate, and Joe Biden got a little over 51% of the vote. That's great. It gave Democrats unified government, but it also suggests that we need to have some attempt at compromise. Tara, do you really think it's possible? It's easy to say this now, but I can see where progressives are going to be very unhappy if Biden does anything that's, say, center left, center right, or dead center. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that the idea of the progressive wing having too much influence is what motivated a lot of split ticket voters during this election. Republicans and moderate Republicans were not okay with Donald Trump, but they still wanted divided government with Republicans having some control of something to balance things out, which is, I understand that. I don't agree with the progressive agenda. I have some concerns about things that they want to do, but they need to realize that that's not the majority of the country. The country is still a center left, center right country. And, I think they need to decide how they want Joe Biden's presidencies, particularly in the beginning, how they want his presidency to go. They need to be team players. They need to learn from the mistakes of the Tea Party. The Tea Party came in very aggressive with their agenda, and they were purists on certain things. And it was great political rhetoric and rah-rah and got people excited, and they accomplished almost nothing. They did nothing but obstruct. They, got rid of, longtime Republicans that had institutional knowledge and understood policy. John Boehner was a sacrificial lamb in that effort, and Paul Ryan, who I know is part of the program, he was a reluctant speaker. That was not his dream in life, but he did the best that he could with that insurgency. So I would hope that the progressives would take lessons from the mistakes that the Tea Party made and not overstep and try to work within the system to accomplish things where they can find common ground. There are areas where you can do that. Do not fight your own right now, because this is not the time for that. So I'm hoping that Joe Biden is able to manage that. He's got to juggle a lot of things. And to my good friend Paul Begala's point, Joe Biden is absolutely the right person for this moment. We all have purpose, and sometimes we don't know what that is. And it's clear to me that Joe Biden's divine providence was preparing him for this moment right now to lead the country out of the quagmire that we are now in. When someone goes through the life experiences that Joe Biden has, it's difficult not to be able to lead a country through the type of adversity that we faced. When you have that sense of loss, you can understand, you have empathy, and Joe Biden is doing the best that he can already now to try to reach across the aisle and mend those wounds. It's going to be a difficult task, but if anyone can do it, it's him. And to Paul's point about, what kind of country are we when you see the way some people are behaving and their reaction to things? It was Ben Franklin who said that only a virtuous people are capable of freedom. And where is our virtue? I think we as a country need to re-examine where we are culturally, the way that we approach one another moving forward, as difficult as this is going to be, because there are a lot of emotional wounds that are deep. But virtue was something that our founding fathers were very particular about, because they designed this system in a way expecting that there would be people who stood up, and that there was hoping that the good faith of the American people and of leaders would be what binds us together ultimately. So otherwise, when nations become more and more corrupt, they have more need of masters, which was the rest of that quote from Franklin. And that's what we see happening on the Trump side. And it's up to us to put a stop to that and make sure that that's not the route that this country goes. And I think we're starting off on a good path with Joe Biden in the White House and with Democrats in control at this point.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned the word virtue, because that may be a hidden advantage for Joe Biden. He goes to Mass every week, so he has built up loads of chits over the years, and now's the time at his age to cash them in. And we all hope it goes better. We need a balm on these troubled waters, and we have a chance to do it. But as both of you have pointed out correctly, we have to participate. All of us are part of this. So fingers crossed, and a special prayer that it actually happens. Thank you, Paul and Tara. You are a lively pair. I knew you would be. And I thank you so much for spending time with us today. And I've been waiting really, 50 years now, and I'm much older than that, to say the following sentence. We'll be right back after these messages. I want to tell you very briefly about a great new program we've been working on here in Virginia with partners like the Commonwealth Learning Project and the Virginia Bar Association. On Tuesday, February 9th, we'll be expanding nationally with our friends at, this is a great title, Unify America. Boy, if today didn't prove their worth, I don't know what does. To launch the Center for Politics' new Civility Project. And again, if the events of today didn't prove we need a civility project, I don't know what will. The project is simply aimed at what unites us rather than what divides us. And we do have so much more that unites us. We focus on the divisions because we have to, and probably it makes better TV. We'll ask our next guest, Margaret Brennan, about that in a moment. Our goal with this project is to lower the temperature a bit on some of the heated rhetoric that plagues politics today and that is leading, unfortunately, to violence. We hope you'll join us. For more information, go to our website, centerforpolitics.org. One word, centerforpolitics.org. Joining me now is a great friend of the university and the Center for Politics, Margaret Brennan. She is, of course, the host of Face the Nation and a graduate of UVA. Yes, I've had quite a number on this program, but you have to understand, we have a very large percentage of the influential people in America who are UVA graduates. We can't help that. Margaret, I know you agree with me on that, don't you?
I do. Wahoo wah, first off. Thank you so much for having me, Professor. And I love finding fellow Wahoos in Washington. And of course, the executive producer of Face the Nation, as you well know, is a Wahoo. The predecessor to me, John Dickerson, was a Wahoo. So I like to think we're carrying on a tradition on Face the Nation.
Yeah, and we made Bob Schieffer an honorary Wahoo during one of his visits down here. So we've kept the tradition. Margaret, you're moderator of one of the great heritage shows in television that brings the First Amendment to life and holds elected officials accountable. You saw what happened in Washington today. You're right there in Washington. I don't know how close to the Capitol. I want to know what you thought and what was the process in watching this and thinking about your show on Sunday. I'm not asking you to reveal proprietary information that Chuck Todd would misuse. I simply am asking you, how do you process that for the show? And more generally, how shocked were you by what you saw?
I think all of us are shocked that these protesters were able to breach the Capitol building. We knew that there were going to be protests. We had been planning for it. The mayor here in Washington, D.C., who now has us all under a curfew that started at 6 p.m. tonight, had been warning for days and had already put the National Guard, or about 300 members of the National Guard, on standby in preparation for what we knew were going to be protests with a number of white supremacist groups, with the Proud Boys, and other Trump supporters who were also saying they were coming here at the president's urging on the date of this, what is normally a ceremonial certification process. I don't think any of us expected, and certainly Capitol Hill police did not appear to have expected what happened today. This is a severe and really concerning security breach. The congressional leadership was rushed out. The vice president himself was put in direct line of danger by Trump supporters today, and directed at him by the president, essentially, in these social media tweets and posts from the president that were critical of the vice president's decision to just honor his ceremonial duties in certifying the results of the election. The president earlier today stood at that rally and encouraged attendees to march to the Capitol to challenge what he called weak Republicans. So in covering all of what we have covered over the past 4 years, I can't think of a moment as just so clear in the chain of events and the linkage to the rhetoric from the president. It is very clear that he is inspiring these supporters. He's being publicly asked by members of Congress to please tell them to stop. And there are continued protests right now. So in terms of digesting it, I think as a country, we're all trying to digest the past year in particular that has been so painful. But this moment, as someone who has covered national security and global markets before that for well over a decade, Turkey and Egypt are calling for peace in the capital of the United States and calling for order. I mean, we have adversaries, we have democracies, we have autocracies watching us around the world with surprise, but perhaps they shouldn't see real surprise, given that so much of what is happening was telegraphed in terms of the groundwork laid in the partisanship you've talked about, with the inflammatory rhetoric, with the direct-to-consumer way to post information on social media that allows for planning of events. But yet, our law enforcement and our institutions did seem surprised today and weren't able to keep these violent mobs from breaching the Capitol.
Margaret, it surprised me because yesterday, without identifying anybody, a congressman sent me some excerpts from online chat rooms that are connected to some of these far right-wing extremist groups with very explicit threats against the government, violence, killing, and I mean they were explicit. And I was just stunned today that apparently some of our government officials or law and security people did not know about this and had not prepared for it. That will certainly be an interesting investigation to come. And you made a great point. I don't think that the United States, for a while at least, will be able to lecture other countries about small d democracy. We obviously have to learn or relearn some of the some of the lessons ourselves. So the shining city on the hill doesn't have as much sheen to it today. Go ahead. I feel great responsibility in the program that we have and the hour we have on Sundays to be very clear with the public, because I think it has been incredibly confusing for many people who don't follow the ins and outs of politics in leading up to this certification, when they have heard reporting that has almost seemed to lend some credence to claims that we know are unfounded, have been dismissed out of court. We have even made clear time and again, to the degree we talked about the challenges that would be launched at the Capitol today, that they had next to zero chance of going anywhere. And I am frustrated that not all of my colleagues have felt that responsibility. And the reason you have a role that has responsibility as a journalist is because you need to be able to explain to the public when it is kabuki theater, when it is real. And I think the public has gotten very confused. I was listening to some networks today and some conservative networks and how they covered it. And they were saying, well, some people showed up at the Capitol today protesting and thought they could change the outcome of election. Well, they thought that because they were told that it was a possibility that they could do so. And that these ideas that have been floated
weren't completely laid bare for what they are, which is, not based on fact and not procedurally even possible in Congress. So I just, as a journalist, I constantly defend my fellow journalists, but I am frustrated that the public was left confused to a certain degree.
That is very important, and if only that message could be delivered and heard and acted on by all of the networks and public and the print media as well, because they contribute to this in various ways. Clearly the sedition caucus, the so-called sedition caucus in the House and Senate, the people who were pushing this ridiculous, utterly absurd idea that major vote fraud existed and that somehow or another they could uncover it on Capitol Hill with 2 weeks to go to the inauguration and maybe reverse the outcome. They are guilty, and they deserve some kind of punishment, some kind of consequences. But of course, the central figure in all this is the President of the United States. You're there in Washington, but even here in Charlottesville, I've already gotten quite a number of communications about what ought to happen to President Trump as a consequence. Some are pushing for the 25th Amendment to be invoked, although I have a hard time believing that the Trump cabinet would ever get the guts to do that. Another impeachment. Clearly, you'd not have time for a trial in the Senate, but I suppose you could have some kind of impeachment vote in the House. I don't know what good that would do. And there are other things being discussed, mainly prosecution once he ceases being president. What have you heard, if you've heard anything on that score there, and what do the experts that you've talked to think are the best options, or what is the best option of all of them?
Well, I think today and yesterday, by the way, these series of events are going to cause a reckoning among Republicans that may impact the answer that I'm going to give you, because for the rest of the party that stood by and really held back any criticism of the president following the election, because they had their eye on the ball, so to speak, in terms of holding on to the Republican Senate majority, which they had hoped to do in Georgia, and that we know, and CBS News is predicting, it is not going to go their way. In fact, that it will be a Democratic majority in the Senate, that those Republicans are now going to look potentially at what happened today and the fact that they lost control of the agenda and the ability to put the brakes in the Biden administration and say, wait a second, who do we hold accountable? That can change a lot. But I don't know, in terms of what you were just laying out, I agree with you in your assessment of the 25th Amendment. I think people are, perhaps it's a bit of liberal wishful thinking as to how quickly change could come with leadership. I have seen and I have heard no reason to believe that is underway. I have been calling people in the White House all day long, and have gotten through to very few of them. I'll be very honest with you. People are ducking and covering today. So I don't see that happening. I do think within the party, this reckoning is going to happen, maybe even more so because of Georgia and the outcome there. And that question that journalists talked about and political watchers talked about after the November presidential election, when they said, what is the message coming out of this for the party? Was this message sent by the suburbs in particular that were so helpful to Joe Biden and the surge of support there for him? Will Republicans start saying now, wait, we should look at who we lost rather than fear the base, and that President Trump could turn that base who was very loyal to him against them? That fear of that base is what has held the tongues of so many senators and so many members of Congress. And just in the past few hours, you've heard some pretty sharp words from a number of Republicans that today was over the line. Yeah. Legally, what could happen to the president? That's going to come down to, I think, New York State. And we'll have to watch if there are any actual crimes among the alleged ones that the state of New York has looked into. But at this point, what is best for the country? That's going to be on the shoulders of Joe Biden, the president-elect, to also look at this mess in the Capitol today and look at the turnout in the presidential race and say, how do I possibly bridge this? I think that is the bigger challenge. And I don't know that holding the president to account or making him some political martyr will help that or hurt that effort. Well, I fear it would stoke support.
Nobody can really know. And of course, some are saying that Trump could be charged with inciting a riot today. But of course, he's the incumbent president, and that gives him a lot of protection. What's interesting to me, though, is also long run. What happened today severely damaged the Trump brand, even with some people who've voted for him twice. And if the Trump brand is damaged, well, that makes it much more difficult for him to run for another term, or one of his children to run in his place in 2024. So I
think you're exactly right.
We haven't heard the end of the Trumps, that's for sure, but we may have heard the end of them on the White House grounds. Let me ask you one other thing. Go ahead, Margaret. Were you going to say something?
No, I think you're right in your analysis. I agree with you, or at least I should say that the prospects for 2024, it will be harder for the president to make that affirmative case of you want 4 more years of this, when his own vice president, who has been so loyal to him, was directly at risk today because he told his supporters to go storm the Capitol. He told his supporters to go potentially harm fellow Republicans. That will hurt the president's ability to shore up support within the party. That's why I think it's so interesting to watch how Republicans reckon with this. But I don't think that broader grievance in America, that broader underlying set of issues disappears with noon on January 20th, and that different understanding of facts. And that will take some time, I think, to work through. That I don't know how that gets resolved, to that fundamental question of is Trump the symptom, or is he the cause, or is he the symptom, and how do we make sense of that as a country?
Well, I think the Republicans have done one thing, that is President Trump, as well as his supporters in Congress and his base. They've done a very good job for millions of Americans. After all, Trump got 74 million votes. Millions of Americans now think Joe Biden is not a legitimate president, which is utterly absurd. He won a very solid victory, same number of electoral votes as Trump, and 7 million votes in a plurality over Trump. And of course, Trump lost by 3 million. So that's a 10 million vote gap there. I don't understand how some people think, but of course, I'm using the wrong verb. I don't think there's a lot of thinking going on there. Final question, Margaret. You mentioned Biden a couple of times, President-elect Biden. I wonder if he is not given a major opportunity because of what happened today. We've talked about him being a very different person, totally different than Donald Trump, and that's an understatement. But the return to normalcy that he will undoubtedly bring to the White House and to the way of conducting business, the nation's business at home and abroad. I'm old enough to remember that Gerald Ford, who wasn't that well known and had been vice president for less than a year when he became president, he skyrocketed to 77% popularity. Nixon was 26% on the day he resigned. Ford goes to 77%. Why? Because he made his own English muffins in the morning, because he was still living in Alexandria, and he came to the door at 6 a.m. in his bathrobe to personally pick up his newspaper. We were so desperate for normality that at least until the Nixon pardon, he was in good shape. I wonder if Biden will benefit from that too. Just the absence of Trump and his constant chaos and controversy. Maybe that will help Joe Biden more than anything. What do you think?
I think there's a case to be made for that, certainly just in public approval ratings. I think, however, and certainly for the forward planning we do for our program, I'm totally anticipating that the problems persist past January 20th, particularly when it comes to executing at the state level the distribution of this vaccine, the ongoing challenges from this pandemic. A lot of that architecture is in place, and while the president-elect and his team can play with some of it, tweak it, that architecture is there. The state governments, it is just going to be political problem after political problem for these governors who are going to be perceived to be being unfair, even when they're not being unfair in terms of who they allocate it to. I think on the economy, it is going to be such a long haul challenge. I'm fascinated by what the nominee to be Secretary of the Treasury, Janet Yellen, will do in her planning, particularly to try to respond to this recession that we are in, that for the very first time has hurt women more than men in terms of removing them from the workforce, and that question of how do you, rebuild that the most vulnerable among us have been hurt the most. These things will persist, and they will drag on the presidency. But that win in Georgia, maybe it greases the skids a bit. It's not clear sailing completely for the legislative agenda of the president-elect, but it will help in some ways get some of these Band-Aids out to the American people in terms of potential stimulus, in terms of potential financial help or support for public health. And those things, in this literal and figurative healing of the country, are going to take some time. But I do think there's going to be a collective sort of psychological breath that maybe the news cycle slows down a little bit and people don't feel overwhelmed.
Let's hope, right? Just a little bit. We're not asking for no news, but I think we could all use a little bit more sleep. Margaret, it's so much fun to have you. We appreciate your knowledge. We appreciate your ability to hold the policymakers to account on Sunday. And I enjoy your show enormously. And it's for lots of reasons. You're very, very good. And also your show comes on at 10:30 a.m. and the other two come on at 9 a.m. And if I'm tired, that's another reason why I'm going to watch your show. Anyway, it's a great show. Face the Nation. I recommend it to everybody. With our Wahoo team there, people have an obligation to support other Wahoos.
Exactly.
To you, I say great good luck during the Biden administration. Stay safe up there in Washington. And most of all, Wahoo Wah.
Wahoo Wah. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Margaret. Really nice of you to come on a busy day. Thanks.
Take care.
Bye-bye. Another Margaret's friends, I think, from another network, Don Lemon from CNN, and he's going to be discussing the whole wide range of events. And this was taped earlier. Fortunately, though, he was taped at a time when he had seen much of the turmoil on the Capitol grounds. So we were able to get into that. Let's run that tape. Let's bring in our next guest, a longtime friend, a seasoned TV journalist on CNN, Don Lemon. As everybody knows, Don is the host of the 2-hour CNN Tonight Show. It's a great opportunity and a privilege, Don, to get to ask you a few questions. So welcome. And there's no way to avoid this. This wasn't exactly our agenda, but we have watched today a contrast between real democracy, which was the election of the 2 Senate runoffs in Georgia, and the opposite of democracy, which is what can only honestly be described as a coup attempt in the midst of the sedition caucus in the House and Senate, all Republicans trying to throw out the legitimate votes, the electoral votes and real votes of the American people to change the result of the presidential election. I just want your reaction before we get into the details. What did you think? How are you reacting to it?
Well, I'm glad you said sedition, because that was the exact word that I was going to use. It is seditious. It's sedition. It is an insurrection. These are not protesters. These are anarchists. These are people who are trying to subvert justice, and these are people who are really subverting our democracy, and really they are rioting in the capital of the United States. It is outrageous. I'm not shocked, though, Larry. I'm not surprised. And for anyone to say they're shocked and surprised, maybe you can be at the same time. But I am outraged that this has been allowed to happen in this country. And the reason I'm not surprised is because this was inevitable. You've had a president and his acolytes and his apologists who have been lying to their supporters and to the American people for so long that this was inevitable. They believe it. Now they're at the Capitol. They're thinking that this election was stolen when it wasn't. They're thinking that there's evidence of some sort of untoward behavior with the election, that something was wrong. This is a clean election. These people have been lied to, and now they are committing treason. They're committing treason based upon lies, Larry. It is sad.
And it's treason. Use the right word, Don. We can't let them get away without using that word. Sedition's a great word, but come right out with it, treason. And our senior officials are involved, from one party, of course, but they're all involved. And as a result, there has to be consequence. Something has to happen as a result. It'll be interesting to see what can happen with only 2 weeks left in Trump's term. Although, if ever there was an opportunity to use the 25th Amendment, it would be now, except we don't have people courageous enough in certain leadership positions in the cabinet and the Congress to actually have it done that way. But Don, let me ask you this. Isn't this, and I've watched your show for years, and you have said this from the beginning that Donald Trump came on the scene. Isn't this the inevitable result of the American public making the worst possible mistake in a presidential election and promoting somebody to the White House who is hateful, who is a would-be dictator, who is narcissistic? It's always about him. There are always little elements of that in presidencies, but we've never had a president like Donald Trump, and God, I hope we never do again. But was it inevitable? You've talked about it so much over the last 4 or 5 years.
I have talked about it, and I think that is, listen, that's my job as a journalist, to do that. And I feel that I've taken oath just as a doctor or an attorney or anyone who is representing someone. And I represent a constituency of American people, the American electorate. And I think you have to be honest with them. I don't believe, as you know, Larry, in this whole sort of fake objectivity that you have to give sanity and insanity equal levels of an equal platform, because that's not true. So from the very beginning, I said that about this president, and I knew that about this president and this presidency, and not the president, but the candidacy. We have to call racist racist. We have to call liars liars. We have to call lies lies, and we can't put lies and truth on equal footing. And I got a lot of flack for that, as you know. People have finally come around, and they finally realize that you don't put liars on television. I stopped putting apologists on television a long time ago, before Trump became president, some of whom became his advisors. But I think a lot of this, Larry, sadly, is of our own doing, because people in some way benefited from having liars on. They benefited from voting for a liar, for voting for someone who is a misogynist, voting for someone who says and does racist things. So a lot of it is our own making. And I think that the past 4 years, I think it is a valuable lesson to everyone in America, regardless of where you are in the political spectrum or scale or whatever side of the aisle you're on. This is a valuable lesson that we should listen to content and context rather than the loudest voice and the person who is the most entertaining. We have to be very careful about who we give our platforms to and who we give the biggest platform in the world to, and that is the Oval Office.
And let's hope at least enough people have learned that lesson. Don, you know what shocks me? After 4 years of his mania, plus the campaign, 74 million Americans voted to have more of it. And that causes me distress more than anything. It gives me pause because it tells me it can happen here. It has happened here now.
Yeah.
It has happened here. That's the end of our arrogance, don't you think, Don, around the world?
I do think it's the end of our arrogance, because how can we say we live in the greatest democracy in the world, and then you see what's playing out on the Capitol steps and in the Capitol this week? How can we say that when we hear the leader of our country trying to coerce an official who is in charge of an election to find the votes somehow to make him president, that to illegally do that? How can we say that? We have, in order to hang on to this democracy, we're going to have to correct that, and we're going to have to correct it very quickly, because we still have a few days, but that can last forever, as you see it playing out, until the end of this presidency, and who knows what lengths he will go to try to continue to hang on to office, or at least continue to hang on to some power. You said a would-be dictator. I would say that it's past the would-be, Larry. So yeah, we can't be, all, feeling ourselves and up in our dignity and like, we're Americans. I think it's time for Americans to take a good long look at ourselves to try to hold on to our democracy. Yes, I do believe in American democracy. I do believe in American exceptionalism. I do think that we live in the greatest country on earth, but I do think that we have to be careful and we need to guard it.
One wonders what's going on in Donald Trump's mind. Just this morning, I talked as a part of this series with a senior Republican who's no longer in office. And I asked him, and he's not pro-Trump, I asked him, what do you think might happen in the remaining 2 weeks? And it fascinated me because the first thing he said was, I really don't think there'll be military action, that is domestic military action, a coup of some sort. And there you are, it's happening. But the second thing he said was, well, we're in for an incredible list of pardons. And I'm sure that part is true. But I think Trump is thinking beyond that. He knows now he can command this army of cultists who will do whatever he tells them to do. It's like Jim Jones, but he's not going to have them drink Kool-Aid. He's just going to tell them how to go and take over. One wonders whether we're fully prepared, because everyone says what this former elected official said. It can't happen here. We won't do that. That's so un-American. You're halfway to having it succeed if you believe it can't happen.
Well, today was a lesson. What we're watching playing out is a lesson. When we're watching people who are storming the Capitol, that is a lesson. And for all of those who thought that it couldn't happen here you go. This is a lesson. So I think, obviously, I think that we should, take the lesson and learn from it, that it can happen here. And as I've been saying, we have to guard against it. It is not too late. I don't believe it is too late, but we have to be on our guard these final days of the Trump presidency. Yes, Larry, he does have this army of folks who will believe anything he says. They are out there, but I think they can be managed, and Trump can be managed. And I think it's incumbent upon the media not to give him so much oxygen. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't report on what he does, because he will be a former president. And some of what he does will matter. But I don't think that we have to be concerned about every tweet and everything that he says and what Donald Trump cares about this. I think the more you starve him of oxygen, the less relevant he will become, the smaller his platform will be, and he will continue, I believe, to speak to an echo chamber of people who, and a dwindling echo chamber, I believe. I believe that those folks will dwindle in numbers once they realize that the country can be better without him. And I thought, Larry, that last night people would realize, after what happened in Georgia with the Senate election, that people would realize that it's all smoke and mirrors, that he has no more real power, that he can't even get two incumbent senators who followed his every word and did everything he said to win in a ruby red state. He has no real power. He's like the Wizard of Oz. He's a man behind the curtain with no real power.
Don, I hope you can.
No real political power.
Political power, exactly. There's his family. That's also worrisome because if he doesn't run, probably he'll have one of the kids run in 2024. But to me, Don, I hope you can sell your colleagues on this, not so much at CNN, but call out people at the other networks who treat him, as some of them will, as still president or as the future president come 2024. This is a cancer on our body politic, and we have got to excise it. We have to exercise discipline in doing it, and that means let his tweets go to his followers unless he's calling for illegal activity or disturbances or riots. Ignore them. Ignore them. Don't bring them to the attention of other people. And for the Trump people that you bring on the show, and you're careful about that, and you shut them up when they lie, but that isn't done on a lot of TV shows. They shouldn't be brought on, but if they are, perhaps it would be a good idea to adopt the technique of the second presidential debate. After Donald Trump misused the first debate and interrupted every word that Joe Biden said, they said, we're going to cut off the microphone if needed, even if it's a president of the United States. Well, I think that's a great opportunity on TV. Or would that work? You're there. You know whether it would work.
Listen, I hate to when people are in the middle of I think constructive discussions to silence people in that way. But I do think sometimes you have to limit the exposure of craziness and of lies. And I don't think people need to see food fights on television all the time. If an argument or discussion is naturally, lively, then I'm okay with that, because that's how real people talk. That's how real people discuss things. When I'm having an argument or a disagreement or a discussion with someone, I'm animated, and I say things like, "Oh, come on, man, stop it!" That's what people do. But I don't think people should, especially over the last 4 years, that so many lies have been allowed to penetrate the American psyche and just to go out on the air unchecked. I don't believe in not checking it. So when someone does lie, I believe that you have to cut them off in real time and correct it. And if they continue to do it, then Larry, I believe you shouldn't bring them on. And there were many people. I don't have to name them now because it's over, but there were many people throughout the course of the Trump campaign and the Trump presidency who I said, I'm not bringing them on my show. I am glad that my colleagues, I'm not meaning just at CNN, but at other networks are coming around to it. But I have been doing that for a long time and getting a lot of guff for it, a lot of criticism from people saying, you're trying to silence people, and this is not America, and you shouldn't be allowed to do that. It is not a right to be on CNN or to be on any news network. It is a privilege. And if you have the privilege of speaking directly to the American people, then you should at least be honest with them and not lie to them. That's a privilege to be able to do it.
You couldn't be more right. And it's not under the First Amendment. You don't have a right to go on television and lie, even if you're president of the United States. Don,
and it's not censorship either.
Yes, absolutely not censorship. It's serving, I hope, the public listening and watching. Don, thank you for all that you do. Thank you for the great show that you put on. And we've only got 2 hours total, and there are a lot of people who want to rant and rave. So we got to give them time to do that. But you were terrific.
I want to thank you as well. I want to thank you for what you do, Larry, and what you're doing centered around politics and teaching people, and for the amazing voice and platform that you have. You use it correctly, you use it wisely, and that's why I love having you on the show. So thank you for allowing me to be part of your platform.
That is extremely kind. Thank you so much, Don. I'll try to earn that in time. But good luck tonight. I know you're going back on tonight, and for God's sake, stay safe. Stay safe. And we'll talk to you soon.
You as well.
Okay. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right. That was a great time with Don Lemon, and we have another great Washington journalist coming on with us in just a second. We're going to be running over a little bit. We have been putting this together on the fly, and some people that we had hoped to talk to have in fact gotten in touch with us. So we hope you'll stay with us. And now I'm just delighted, right from, I guess, the White House press room. This particular journalist owns it. Everyone knows they have to pay him rent. He is ABC's chief White House correspondent during the Trump years at the White House. He's the author of a great book, which if you listen to this segment, you are required to buy. It's mandatory reading, required reading, Front Row at the Trump Show. And it's actually a great book. It was a good read, and I think you'll enjoy it. But that's not why I'm having John on. John is the father of Anna Carl, and you guessed it, she's a UVA student and a loyal devotee of the Center for Politics. And she highly recommended you, John. That's why you're here. Okay?
She's tough to please, so that's big.
Yeah,
that's
no,
big.
It is big. Well, she doesn't say it to you directly, but she's told us good things. John, this has got to be one of the most bizarre days that you have ever spent, I guess, at the White House or in Washington. Tell us where you were, what you were doing, and what you think about this.
Well, no question about it. I'm gonna step outside so I can take off this mask and maybe you'll hear me a little better. I have to tell you, this day at times had me on the verge of tears watching what was going on. Watching the president come out this morning and talk to a raucous group of supporters, diehard supporters, and say that he would never concede, and urging them to march up Pennsylvania Avenue and to go to the Capitol to protest his own vice president, Mike Pence, who he slammed 3 times in that speech this morning. And even to say that he was going to hint that he was going to join them. He was going to join folks on the, going up to the Capitol to say, we cannot be weak. You don't take your country back by being weak. And, watching those people with Trump flags, and far more blue Trump flags than American flags, bursting through the police lines and into the Capitol building, a place that I know, Larry, you've spent a lot of time. I've spent a lot of time. It's the symbol of American democracy. It's the center of American democracy. Barging in, taking over the Senate chamber. It's one of the images that just blew me away. It was one of these rioters going in to Nancy Pelosi's office and putting his feet on her desk.
Incredible.
I mean, another person coming through with a large American flag right by a painting of Senator Calhoun, the painting that's right off the Senate floor, with a Confederate flag. Absolutely shocking images and a horrifying day.
John, that was horrible, just to hear you describe it, to have one of those awful people with their feet up on Nancy Pelosi's desk. I know that you have sources in and around the Secret Service, and I've had the opportunity to talk with a couple of people who have knowledge of what's planned. And there is not confidence in the White House that he will leave on time. And apparently, there are contingency plans for getting him out of the White House. Can you tell us anything about that, or is that proprietary?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yes. Go.
Yep. Peter?
Larry?
Yes.
I lost you there for a second. Are you there?
Yeah, I'm right here, John. Right here.
Okay, great. Yeah. You were saying about what's going to happen next, and I heard you say that whether or not there is confidence, and then you went out. Confidence that he remains another 14 days, the president of the United States?
That too. I think we want to discuss. But what I've heard is there is a contingency plan by the appropriate authorities to get him out physically, and anybody else who's there, his family and friends and staffers who remain in the White House after noon on January 20th. I don't know whether that's actually going to happen, but they actually have to have a contingency plan for it. Have you heard anything along those lines?
I mean, what I haven't heard what is going to take place, but I've heard a lot of concern about how it is going to unfold, and who is going to be left here. I mean, I just spoke to one of his real allies, who's still talking to him. We talked to him today. Had a very angry conversation with him today, and about whether or not he can actually serve out the rest of this term and the 25th Amendment. These are real discussions among people that are close to him. They say that he has lost his mind, and they don't mean that as a figure of speech anymore. It's hard to imagine what that day, assuming he gets there, what that day of January 20th looks like, and what that passing of the baton looks like. As you know, with the exceptions, very few exceptions, Andrew Johnson, John Adams, very few exceptions, we've had a choreography that has worked out from one outgoing president to one incoming president. That's obviously not happening.
Well,
John and Larry, it's Phil Murphy. Can you hear me?
Governor Phil Murphy of New Jersey has joined us. He wants to take issue with John Karl.
Murphy tends to do that from time to time, Governor.
Hey, I apologize. I've got a very narrow window. I don't take any issue with you, Larry, or John, or my dear friend Peter Kiernan. But and I apologize. I've only got a couple of minutes here. But I assume you want a reaction to today and where we go from here. Is that fair to say?
I'd like to hear it, and I'm sure John would too. Thank you, Governor, for joining us.
Listen, one of the darkest days, I would say, in our country's history. We'll start with that. Completely unacceptable. From the New Jersey perspective, I spoke with Mayor Bowser probably 3 hours ago at this point, maybe a little bit longer. And we're sending 50 New Jersey state troopers, and I offered to send our National Guard if she needs it. And we did this at her request, and she was very grateful for that. I'm not smart enough to know where this goes from here. I'm very happy to see that both chambers are reconvening tonight as a statement that democracy does not wilt in the face of folks who are trying to do something as untoward as they attempted to do today. That's a good thing. Joe Biden will be, we're all overwhelmingly certain, will be certified as the next president of the United States. I don't know where the next 14 days go. I know there's lots of discussion and rumors, and as I think John was saying, real contingency plans that are not abstract anymore. So I'm not. That's above my pay grade. But I'm going to put aside folks who are unlawful and just who do unspeakable things. You still have 74 million folks plus who voted for the president, and there are tens of millions of them who are good people who are screaming out for help, screaming out for leadership, screaming out. I would bet overwhelmingly for kitchen table stuff, jobs, education, healthcare, their shot at whatever their slice of the American dream might be, and I think that's the big challenge, and I think it's the big opportunity. And I don't say that as a Democrat. I say that I do think that's the case for Democrats, but I say it as an American. I think in that scenario you could not have a better person coming in if you went to central casting for a president who has spent decades literally.
Governor, we're losing.
Have a better guy coming in.
Yeah. Hey, Governor, let me ask you something real quick here before you go. Do you believe that based on what you saw today, perhaps the president is guilty of inciting a riot? And of course, there are charges about loads of other things. Do you believe the former president, should be prosecuted for any of those crimes?
Above my pay grade. His leadership today, what happened today is unspeakable, completely unspeakable and unacceptable. This is on his hands, on his watch, on his.
Well, we got the gist of that. Governor, if you can hear me, thank you so much for joining us here. Please give my regards to your wife and to your daughter. And we'll talk at greater length some other time. And thanks for making time for us. Is John still on? John Karl?
Yeah. Hey, Larry.
Yeah.
I'm still here, but I'm walking over to the North Lawn camera position because we're about to go live back on the ABC network with our continuing coverage of this.
Well, look, what's more important, John, being with me or being in front of millions, in a national audience? It's a close call. You gave the right answer, John. You gave the right answer. No, look, I know you got to do it. It's great of you to do this. You were taking calls about critical matters, and you fit us in. So thank you very much for that. We want to have you back to the university, whether we have a democracy or a dictatorship. Whatever works out, we'll have you back, assuming travel is permitted. Maybe we can get you a visitor's pass. But anyway, what an incredible day. I thought the Georgia runoffs would be the big story, but boy, in the Trump era, you never know what's coming in the next hour.
Yeah, unbelievable. Well, let's talk again soon, Larry. Always great to talk to you.
Thank you, John. Take care of yourself.
Take care.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
All right. And now, if I'm guessing correctly, and we appreciate John coming on, we appreciate Governor Murphy of New Jersey coming on. These things are kind of unplanned, but I know that many of my former students will enjoy it. But my last guest, and the last shall be first, has been in the news media quite a bit since the election. He's the former director of cybersecurity with the Department of Homeland Security. He is also a UVA graduate, class of 1999, a former student of mine. I've claimed you a million times, Chris, and I know you learned everything that you needed to know about cybersecurity in American Politics 101 in the latter part of that great decade. But Chris, just to start off, before I ask you questions, I want you to know how proud we are of you and the way you handled this. It's not easy to be fired by the President of the United States after you've done a fantastic job that everybody's acknowledged, and then you read about it either in a news story or on Twitter or something. But you won a lot of friends and admirers. They may not have known what you were doing. They should have. We all should have known what you were doing. We didn't, but now we do. We have a better idea of what you and your team were doing to protect our elections. So we thank you for that. We're delighted you're a UVA grad, and wahoo wah, you have to say that now live. Wahoo wah, go ahead.
Larry, wahoo wah, I was wearing the hat.
Okay, well, the hat plus wahoo wah. All right, well, let me ask you a couple questions here, Chris. I know it's late at night, but all the great wahoos are on here. I was listening to well, let me first ask you about what happened today. Was this a failure of intelligence? Because yesterday, I just want you to know this, yesterday a congressman sent me some incredibly disturbing excerpts of what were on some of the private channels, saying they were going to do exactly what they did today, except they had planned to kill a lot more people. Now, maybe law enforcement had all of this, I don't know, but boy, we sure didn't see a lot of people prepared, officers prepared on the Capitol Hill lawn. What happened?
I don't know, Larry. I'm neither blessed nor cursed to receive intelligence briefings anymore, so I can't really explain just what seemed to be a breakdown of security and containment in the Senate building. Like you, I've spoken to a number of members of Congress today that just they were concerned about what seemed to have been a lack of preparation, and just there not seeming to be a game plan. I mean, we've known that this sort of thing could happen since about 1812, so it seems that there should be a plan in place.
And that's the congressman that you talked to, did they suggest any reasons why? Did they know why this happened?
They were as confused and confounded as you are. And I suspect there will be an investigation into what the breakdown was with Capitol Police and other law enforcement elements. And that's probably one of the many investigations that we'll be hearing about in the coming months.
Well, Chris, let's get back to your story in the election, because I think it's very important. And you may have seen Meet the Press on Sunday. Senator Ron Johnson said something that I found either interesting or dead wrong. He said you testified at his committee that there might have been some voter fraud because some machines were connected to the internet, and you said, oh, it was the most secure election. But in our hearing, said Senator Johnson, he actually admitted he wasn't talking about potential fraud. He was just looking at hacking. He also admitted that some of these election tabulation machines are hooked up to the internet. What's the truth? What actually happened? Because I don't believe his version.
That was, I've testified a lot, particularly in front of that committee, Senate Homeland Security. And that was a marathon hearing by my experience, over 3 hours. And so you take a lot of that conversation over 3.5 hours, then you consolidate it down into a 5-minute hit with Chuck Todd, and you don't always get the full context and the truth. So what we were talking about at the Cyber and Infrastructure Security Agency, where I was the director up until I was fired by the president's tweet on November 17th, what we were focused on was the security of the systems that you as voters use to cast your vote sometimes, that are used to count the vote, to process the registrations, all of that. And so from a security perspective, absolutely most secure election in modern history. We know that because we have been working on it for 4 years. We had the advantage of 4 years of preparation. The prior administration had about 4 months. And that's law enforcement, that's FBI, that's the intelligence community. We were looking out, we were looking in, and there was no evidence whatsoever of any sort of compromise of the vote casting, counting, and certification process. Now, what we did was issue on November 12th a statement of a host of folks that were involved in the vote administration, the election administration process. And we were specifically talking about the cybersecurity piece, but there were stakeholders, state and local election officials, who said, there's no widespread fraud. The Attorney General Barr, said there is no fraud. The courts, and I don't want to hear any of this garbage about, it was all these are technical claims that issues that these cases are dismissed on. Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Georgia federal courts assessed on the merits of some of these cases, like Lynn Wood's case down in Georgia, and dismissed on the merits. There was no widespread fraud in this election. If you don't believe me, if you don't like me, I don't care. This was a secure election. There was no widespread fraud. What is happening right now is an absolute miscarriage of democracy. And I hope that when they get back in that chamber and cast their votes to support the certification of the election, that there is not a single objector, because if there is, there has to be a reckoning.
Well, you're absolutely right. They would start with a measure of censure against President Trump. That would be a good start. I'd extend it to members of the Sedition Caucus in the Senate and the House, but I'm not a member of Congress. This Russian hack, this gigantic Russian hack, can you tell us any more about it? And was there any piece of it that affected elections?
So I think I tweeted about that almost day one of the hack coming out in the public. The reason we know that there was no intersection of this election, of this hack with the election systems, is because we have the paper ballots, we have the receipts. And even if the Russians were able to get into any sort of election systems, when you vote on a piece of paper and you count it 3 times like you did in Georgia, including manual hand recounts, that's how you know that the vote was secure. So going back to our statement saying that this was a secure election, what we are talking about is we know it's secure because we have the paper.
Well,
so
no, go ahead.
But more broadly on this hack, I mean, the Russians are very, very good. It's very sophisticated. They're capable. They're quiet. They're patient. And they are diligent, and they worked at it, and they were successful here. And now, how do we root them out, and then how do we make sure it never happens again? And that's going to be the challenge of the Biden administration.
Have you had any indications that they want to work with you, or they want you to work with them?
So I've had a number of conversations with both folks on the Hill, and I've got a bunch of friends in the transition. And for me, I've always believed that each administration needs to choose their own folks and not be necessarily saddled or burdened with the prior administration. So, I was going to be resigning anyway. It happened on January 20th. And then if they had asked me to stick around, I'd have to consider it. But, I've been fortunate that, when I came in March of 2017, I promised my wife that I would only be in for 18 months. And 3.5 years later, there I am, still doing the job. And so I've just had an incredible support network. My parents, my dad's a Wahoo. I got uncles and my brother and aunts and all that. So in fact, I'm third generation UVA. So, we keep it in the family.
Wahoo wah, wahoo wah, wahoo wah. That's great. Triple who in the family.
Right.
And you've got 5 kids, don't you?
I have a whole mess of kids, yeah.
But you're not sure of the number?
I last time I counted, I still had 5.
Okay,
Yep.
terrific. Well, it's amazing that you were able to do everything that you did do and do such a fantastic job. And I was thrilled to see that 60 Minutes in particular highlighted all the good things that you did to improve the election system. Normally 60 Minutes is tough. I don't know how you calmed them down. They can, Leslie Stahl was it Leslie Stahl that interviewed you?
No, Scott Pelley.
Oh, Scott Pelley. Okay, well he's even meaner, and he did a terrific job and praised you as you should have been praised. Chris, we are delighted to announce on this broadcast that you are going to be one of our visiting scholars at the Center for Politics, and so our students here, your successors as a student, will have the benefit of asking you questions and hearing you in classes and complaining about the grades you give them and all the things you did when you were here. But
yeah, I'm sure they're better students than I was, Larry, but I'm looking forward to it.
Well, you majored in environmental sciences. See, that was the mistake you made. It should have been politics, but you've lived and you've learned and you've come back to politics, and I'm thrilled about that. Chris, we look forward to seeing you down here once the pandemic eases up. We look forward to having you assume that role. And the role that you've really performed, as far as I'm concerned, other than giving us a very secure and fair election, is as a role model. Role model for many of the students who are watching. The main audience here, students who are in the J term, the January term. And you're an example of what happens when you do the right thing. It's not easy to stand up and do the right thing, but that's what you did. You suffered some consequences for it, but I think you made an awful lot of friends and allies by doing it. So we salute you. We look forward to seeing you down here. And I think we've said wahoo wah enough, but what the heck, wahoo wah.
Wahoo wah, Larry, and looking forward to getting back down on grounds.
Thank you, Chris. Take care of yourself. Bye-bye. And now, okay, this has gotten completely disorganized toward the end, and I apologize for that. And I blame everyone else here because that's what leaders do. It's what I've learned in the Trump administration. Despite the pandemic, there's a lot to be optimistic about. Politics, well, I used to say politics is a good thing. Now I say politics can be a good thing. So we've got slightly larger buttons that we used to hand out. Certainly our system isn't perfect. Certainly we can improve. Certainly we have to improve based on what happened today. And people must be actively engaged in our system. They need to get more engaged in our system. They need to reach out to other people who don't agree with them. Have a conversation. It may get loud and brassy at times, but that's okay. That's okay. Don't start throwing things, and certainly don't go to the Capitol and break windows. You need to look no further than last November's elections to realize that your vote and your voice really matters. In 12 short days, we'll welcome a new president to the White House. Maybe you like him, maybe you don't, but I think we need to give him as much support as we can because of the crisis of the pandemic, because of the crisis of governance and polarization, and because we need to be rebuilt and regenerated after the stresses, the strains, and the chaos of the last 4 years. We wish certainly President Biden, President-elect Biden, the very best. Vice President-elect Kamala Harris, the very best. We owe them and the nation a chance to be successful. And we'll look forward to seeing all of you again soon. Remember, this is just the first of a whole series of President Ryan's democracy dialogues. And this was a little chaotic itself. But democracy's chaotic. Democracy dialogues are chaotic, but they serve a purpose and are underlined, in a sense, by the way they're conducted. So thank you so much for joining us. We look forward to continuing the conversation with you as we move through this next semester and beyond. And again, wahoo wah. I think I've now said it 100 times over the last 2.5 hours.